After Damien Tan was forced to marry me, I got into a car accident and lost my memory. He visited the hospital, his tone incredibly impatient, asking what trick I was playing to corner him this time. I apologized and took the opportunity to suggest a divorce. He froze, then gritted his teeth, asking if I wanted to drive him to his grave. The truth was, when Damien arrived at the hospital, I was already awake. He glanced at me lying on the hospital bed, immediately retracted his gaze, and sat himself down on the adjacent sofa, warning me not to use this method next time as the costs outweighed the benefits. Before he arrived, my friend had already briefed me on the nature of our relationship. I took a deep breath and told him that I had lost my memory. He froze for a moment before curling his lips in a mocking sneer, asking what new scheme I was hatching to pressure him. Amnesia. He asked if I had been reading too many novels and if I took him for a fool. He did not believe me. It was understandable. After all, I heard that relations between us had been taut as a violin string for years. If I were in his shoes, I would also think I was staging a scene. I smirked. I did not even bother to argue with him. The doctor standing nearby could not stand it anymore and bluntly informed him of my medical condition. The more Damien listened, the worse his expression became, until he finally turned his head to look at me, asking how much I had forgotten. We locked eyes, and I suddenly felt a pang of guilt, finally whispering that I had forgotten we were married. Damien stared at me for a few seconds, then laughed out of sheer anger. He asked if I meant I had forgotten how I took advantage of the chaos to force him into marriage, or if I had forgotten how I had used every trick in the book over the past 2 years. He asked if I had forgotten how I tried to force him to love me, telling me that I, Felicity Shen, was truly impressive. Damien looked like he was on the verge of losing his mind. My friend had only mentioned that our relationship was not great, she never mentioned this part. I never expected that the version of me from 2 years later would resort to forced love. I quietly stole a glance at Damien. His features were sculpted with sword-like brows and starry eyes, a face that was incredibly striking. It was no wonder I resorted to coercion. It is a pity that I am not the me of 2 years later, as I still retain a shred of morality. I remained silent for a long time, waiting for Damien to stabilize his emotions. Only then did I tentatively speak up to apologize, saying I had heard about what happened between us. Damien let out a scoff, asking what exactly I had heard. Perhaps the part where I toyed with him. I was cut off by his comment that despite my looks, my words were unbearable. I bit my lower lip and continued, stating that I agreed to the divorce and would do my best to compensate him afterward, asking if he wanted cash or shares. I thought hearing me say that would lift a burden off his shoulders. Unexpectedly, Damien became even more furious. He froze in place, his expression incredibly unsightly as he looked at me with disbelief, gritting his teeth to ask if I wanted to drive him to his death with talk of divorce. He demanded to know what gave me the right to dictate when we married and when we divorced. He told me to forget it, declaring that I should not hope to escape him in this lifetime. Nor was I allowed to like anyone else because he would not yield his place to another man. He ranted aggressively without stopping, and by the end, the rims of his eyes had begun to turn red. I was a bit flustered and had to retract my previous words, saying I was just speaking off the cuff and that it was fine if he did not want a divorce. Damien turned his face away, stubbornly asking who said he did not want a divorce. I sighed helplessly and began to coax him, admitting that it was I who did not want a divorce, that I was the one who could not bear to leave him, and that I was afraid I would regret it and beg him to remarry me once my memory returned. Damien feigned a fierce glare at me. Dealing with men was indeed exhausting, even more so than getting into a car accident. On the way home, Damien did not say a word to me, while I finally managed to piece together the whole story from my friends. Simply put, I had fallen in love with Damien at first sight. I pursued him relentlessly but he rejected me. Ironically, just at that time, the Tan family went bankrupt. Unwilling to give up, I blocked every retreat route for his family and used that leverage to force him to marry me. The consequence was that in 2 years of marriage, he had never given me a pleasant look. It was truly a sin. Why was I so foolish back then to mimic others and scheme to force a marriage? What was even more sinful was that looking at Damien's face now, I still felt the urge to force him. I tried to push those unhealthy thoughts out of my mind. I made a resolution to turn over a new leaf. Ever since he denounced me at the hospital, Damien seemed to treat me like air. Just thinking about having to share a bed with him at night made my heart flutter continuously in a shameful manner. However, seeing that mournful face of his made my heart stop fluttering immediately. I told myself to let it go, as forced love does not last. I was packing my things to go out when I bumped into Damien, who had just finished showering. His V-line was clearly visible, and his abdominal muscles extended downwards, disappearing into his bathrobe. Damn it, the me of 2 years later really ate well. I swallowed hard and turned my face away. I told him that I knew he did not want to sleep with me, so I would go sleep in the guest room. Having said that, I lifted my foot to leave but was blocked. Damien stood in front of me, his warm breath enveloping me. He told me, Felicity, that he felt the need to remind me of one thing: sleeping in the guest room was forbidden, as that was a house rule I had set myself. His eyes looked at me with mockery. I was stunned for a moment before regaining my composure, refusing to show weakness and wanting to salvage some dignity. I asked him if he simply obeyed just because I set the rule, noting that his words and actions did not seem to match. Damien remained emotionally unmoved, instead stepping closer to me, his tone laced with self-deprecation. He explained that it was because I, the heiress, had stated that if he slept in the guest room, I would withdraw investment from his family's company. That was truly terrible. The me of 2 years later was indeed full of schemes. I felt so guilty that I dared not look at him, stiffly explaining that the house rule was directed at him. So it should not matter if I slept in the guest room. I was just about to run when Damien pulled me forcefully onto the bed. He told me he did not want me to regain my memory and then bring up old scores to settle with him. He dropped that sentence and then turned his back to me, lying down. I hesitated for a few seconds but finally slept with him. Too many things had happened that day. I was exhausted both physically and mentally, so I fell asleep before long. The next morning I woke up in Damien's arms. It was not in vain that I spent every day watching muscular guys in videos. Although the process was a bit bumpy, the result was quite satisfying. I was just about to snuggle a little deeper into his embrace when Damien's voice rang out from above my head, asking if I still did not forget to take advantage of him even after losing my memory. Being caught red-handed by the owner, I was embarrassed and hurriedly escaped from his arms. Seeing my reaction, he gave a soft snort and got out of bed himself. Looking at his back, I cursed silently in my heart. He remarked that before I used to curse right to his face, asking if now I only had that much courage left. Having been seen through again, my anger turned into embarrassment. He was clearly being unreasonable. Damien did not get angry but instead smiled, turning to look at me with amusement in his eyes, noting that I used to curse exactly like that. Facts prove that sometimes you cannot judge a book by its cover. For example, I was captivated by Damien's face and ended up bringing home a living statue. Sitting at the dining table, I suddenly remembered something. Looking at Damien, who was silent opposite me, I hesitated for a moment before asking where our marriage certificate was, as I wanted to take a look. Damien's hand holding the spoon paused, then he replied without changing his expression that he had torn it up. Torn it up? He asked what else I expected. He looked up at me, his tone still incredibly cold, asking if I expected him to keep it so that every time he looked at it, he would remember the fact that he was forced by me. I was left speechless. Quietly finishing the meal, I hurriedly complained to my friend. Chloe, she never liked the men around me, and contrarily, she never went along with my whining. She told me to just make do with it, asking if I really thought I could get a divorce, and added that she found our pure hate couple dynamic quite entertaining. She told me to stop talking because she genuinely shipped this couple. A pure hate couple. And she shipped that? I was a bit speechless and sent her 6 dots. I was just about to video call her to complain when a noise came from downstairs. I went down and saw a man with blue, dyed hair laughing and talking to Damien. Damien still wore that morning face. Balance was restored. Perhaps it wasn't that Damien disliked me, but rather that he had a congenital facial defect. The other man saw me and immediately greeted me warmly. He called me sister-in-law, saying he heard I had a car accident, lost my memory, and planned to divorce Damien. He exclaimed that it was such a coincidence, as he happened to be a divorce lawyer. He told us we didn't need to look further, as he had brought himself right to our door. I understood. The job market for law was so harsh that lawyers had to make house calls to solicit business. I walked over with interest, and he introduced himself. Tyler Xiao and Damien were truly polar opposites. His words were not only humorous and witty but also very smooth. After listening to him for over 10 minutes, I actually wanted to sign up for a divorce package with him. He told me that his law firm was running a promotion. Divorce this month came with a 28% discount. Considering we were acquaintances, he offered me a straight 50% off. Who wouldn't be moved by 50%? But I asked if we needed to reissue the marriage certificate since ours had been torn up. Tyler looked at me with some suspicion, then looked at Damien. He asked if our marriage certificate wasn't kept in Damien's safe, with the password being our wedding anniversary. He added that Damien said I had forced him to do that. What? Why did it feel like a pot of blame had suddenly landed on my head? I turned my head in astonishment to look at Damien, whose eyes flashed with a hint of panic before quickly returning to normal. He used a tone that sounded completely unrelated to himself, claiming that I told him to keep it. But he didn't listen and tore it straight up. Tyler looked at him in confusion, the corner of his mouth lifting into a meaningful smile, while Damien's eyes shot him a warning glance. Tyler tried to suppress his laughter and turned to answer my question. He explained that if the marriage certificate was torn, we just needed to reissue it to proceed with the divorce normally. I nodded unconsciously. Damien looked unhappy. He asked if I really wanted a divorce, demanding that I, Felicity, count how many times I had mentioned divorce since I woke up. He asked if I no longer wanted him to marry me, remarking that I changed my heart too quickly in less than 2 years. Alright, he wasn't just a little unhappy, he was extremely unhappy. Since he was the man I chose myself, even if he broke my teeth, I had to swallow them. I spoke casually to smooth things over, telling him not to be sad as I was just asking and didn't say I wanted a divorce. Damien shouted louder to hide his feelings, turning his face away, but the tips of his ears were slightly red, asking who was sad. Tyler stood by watching the drama, perhaps feeling the plot was lacking, so he added fuel to the fire. He told me that since we argued every day, we would break up eventually anyway, so we might as well divorce now, offering an additional 30% discount to ensure neither of us lost out. Before he could finish his sentence, Damien grabbed a tangerine and threw it at him. He threatened that if Tyler didn't get lost, he would break his bones right then and there. Tyler hesitated for a few seconds between his career and his life, finally choosing to leave quickly. After Tyler left, Damien seemed to have calmed down, but he kept hovering in front of me, occasionally making some noise. I couldn't figure it out, so I had to ask Chloe. She replied with a sweat drop smile emoji, then forwarded a post to me titled, "Why does the newly bought cat keep meowing?" The answer was in the comments section. There were all sorts of comments. "Go home, child, go home," winking for the blind to see, because humans can't meow like cats. After looking at it for a long time, I still didn't understand anything. So why did it keep meowing? Chloe couldn't take it anymore and sent me a 10-second voice message. She told me to stop reading so many novels, as having a pile of theories without practice was useless. She suggested I take advantage of my amnesia to jump him now, and if he dared to run after I regained my memory, I should just lock him up. I hadn't muted my phone, and by the time I realized what she was saying, it was too late. Damien looked at me with deep meaning. Not only were his cheeks suspiciously flushed, but there was also a vague look of expectation in his eyes. Expectation. I immediately dismissed this thought from my head. The car accident indeed still had some lingering effects. Damien toyed with the cup in his hand, gave a soft sniff, and said absent-mindedly that after pretending for 2 years, I finally couldn't hold it back anymore. He slowly approached me. I instinctively backed away until there was no road left to retreat. Leaning against the wall, Damien stood in front of me, looked down at me, his lips moving slightly. He challenged me, Felicity, to try locking him up if I had the guts. I felt like I really needed to go to the hospital for a checkup. It was clear he was threatening me. Yet I kept feeling like he was actually hinting at something. Hinting for me to hurry up and do it. After threatening me, Damien's mood clearly improved significantly. I racked my brains but couldn't understand what he meant, so I had to ask Chloe again. She was silent for over 10 seconds before replying with something completely irrelevant, asking if I had ever encountered a vengeful male spirit. I sent a question mark. She said if I had, then congratulations, I now owned one. I really thanked her. Right now I didn't care if he was human or ghost. What I wanted to know more was whether he had actually torn up the marriage certificate. Sometimes I really didn't know if I was forcing Damien to stay home or if he just liked staying home himself. For several consecutive days, I didn't have a chance to look for the safe Tyler had mentioned. Damien's gaze towards me shifted from initial expectation to suspicion. His eyes seemed to be asking why I hadn't made a move yet. It felt like even though I was the one in the car accident, he was the one acting like he had brain damage. After his first hint failed, Damien broke down and finally decided to leave the house. He told me Tyler and the guys called him out for drinks tonight. Before I could even respond, he went on a monologue, saying that of course if I didn't want him to go it was fine, just don't use the investment to threaten him. He added that if I really didn't let him go out, he could stay. Seeing that he really intended not to go, I hurriedly told him to go. Of course he had to go. I had waited several days for him to finally go out. After receiving my permission, Damien's face grew even darker, he grabbed a car key and stormed off. Once I was sure he had left, I immediately started searching the entire house. I looked everywhere but couldn't find it, leaving only the wine cellar. I walked in without much hope but unexpectedly discovered an object that looked like a safe in the corner. I entered our wedding anniversary date, and the safe opened immediately. Inside were just 2 marriage certificates. They were even wrapped in a protective cover. The sound of my heart beating like thunder echoed clearly in the small space. All doubts and guesses since the car accident finally had an answer. On the day of the accident, I had decided to find Damien to have a frank conversation, but I met with the accident before reaching home and passed out. When my consciousness slowly returned, I heard someone crying. And then a teardrop fell onto the back of my hand. I tried to open my eyes to look at Damien, who was gripping my hand tightly, his eyes full of red blood vessels. His gaze was finally no longer cold, but filled with fear, anxiety, and a concern that could not be ignored. In that moment, I seemed to finally understand that he appeared to like me. I had never known how to handle relationships, so the moment I took a liking to Damien's face, I confessed. Hearing that someone wanted to use money to keep him as a sugar baby, I acted first, forcing him to marry me, but I didn't know how to treat him well. I had always thought he hated me, or even loathed me, but it seemed that was not the case. Before I passed out from the car accident, images flashed in my mind of him always being there when I was sick, his unconscious gaze in photos, and all the small memories over the past 2 years. He must like me. I had intended to talk to him clearly after fully waking up. But I didn't expect this Damien to be such a superb actor. He was 2 different people in front of and behind my back. He had clearly visited me early on, yet kept pretending he had just arrived. Since he liked acting, then I would act out a grand play with him. I would act until he couldn't hold up anymore. Act until his true feelings had nowhere to hide, act until this mute man had to open his mouth and speak. I took the marriage certificates out of the safe and hid them in a different location. Just as I finished, Tyler suddenly sent me a location pin. He messaged that he couldn't stand our slow speed anymore, and had to intervene to speed things up, telling me not to rush in when I arrived but to alert him first. I was a bit curious about Tyler's methods. Arriving at the place, I stood outside the door and sent him a message. Tyler didn't reply to me, but immediately after, his voice rang out from inside, seemingly intended for everyone to hear. He asked Damien, demanding to know if he actually liked Felicity or not. No way. Did he start without even a warm-up? Did he not need a little foreplay? Although the method was too blunt, I couldn't help but feel nervous. Damien fell silent for a few seconds before laughing coldly. Like her? How was that possible? He said clearly that he hated her. My heart felt like it had fallen into an abyss. Tyler seemed to have predicted he would say that, his words full of mockery. He asked if his friend hadn't finished brainwashing himself after 2 years. Every day asserting he hated her, while secretly loving her behind her back. That taste wasn't very pleasant, was it? He asked what exactly Damien hated. Hating this and that. In the end, was just hating that she didn't love him as much. His other friends also started to chime in. They agreed, saying they felt Felicity treated him just normally. One said he had never seen Damien in her circle of friends. He asked Damien if maybe she was already bored, saying that was common. These somewhat jarring words finally caused Damien to break down completely. He shouted that they were talking nonsense, asking how she could not love him. He said he was the one she seized by force, she was the one who forced him to marry, so she couldn't possibly not love him. When I first pursued Damien, he asked me why I said I liked his face. When I proposed marriage to him, he still asked me why. I said I was unwilling to give up, from beginning to end. I finally remembered an important link I had overlooked. I had never affirmed that I liked him. I pushed the door open and walked in. I didn't know how many glasses Damien had drunk. His tolerance for alcohol was very good, I knew that. So when he looked at me, his eyes were still very sober. He seemed not to expect my arrival, trying his best to hide the flame of joy dancing in the depths of his eyes. I took the initiative to explain, saying I was worried about him, so I asked for Tyler's address. Damien tried to suppress a smile, pretending not to care, even speaking with a hint of annoyance. He asked what there was to be worried about. He said he would definitely come back, telling me I didn't need to follow him so closely. I heard it, the showing off in his tone. My appearance seemed to have aroused the curiosity of the others. As soon as I sat down, Damien's friends clamored to ask me. Calling me sister-in-law, they asked if it was true that Damien said I pursued him. I nodded, the corner of Damien's mouth lifted, so they asked if it was also true that I insisted on marrying him. I continued to nod. The corner of Damien's mouth lifted further. Then they asked if it was true that I forced him to come home before 10 p.m. every day and report to me when going out. Huh. Since when did I force him to do those things? Exactly how many pots of blame had this Damien dumped on my head outside? I glared at him, he turned his face away, looking a bit guilty. Everyone was curiously waiting for my answer. I took a deep breath and admitted it. I said yes, I forced him to do that. I added that if possible, I wanted to lock him at home for a lifetime. Everyone present gasped. So did Damien. The difference being that the others were scared, while Damien was delighted. Tyler stood aside, seeing through everything without speaking, trying to suppress his laughter. Damien glanced at his watch, grabbed the jacket next to him, stood by me, and signaled to leave. I said I had just sat down not long ago, suggesting we sit a while longer. Damien snorted coldly, telling me not to dream of setting a trap. He said there were still 20 minutes until 10 o'clock, and it took 18 minutes to get home from there. Who knew what method I would use to deal with him if we were late? I was about to laugh out of anger. It turned out that for the past 2 years, the rumors about him were all spread by himself. Damien urged me with his eyes, so I had to stand up and say goodbye to everyone. He walked in front of me. But I could tell he was deliberately walking slowly. I suddenly had the urge to tease him. I asked if waiting for me while walking was also something I forced him to do. Hearing this, Damien's body stiffened momentarily, having his true feelings exposed, his anger turned into embarrassment, and he walked faster. Looking at his indignant back, I found it even more amusing. When I caught up with Damien, there was an uninvited guest beside him. I knew that person. He had pursued me before, but I rejected him. After knowing I liked Damien, he even sought him out to cause trouble. I didn't know what he said to Damien. But both were tense, their expressions not looking good. I quickened my pace and walked over, just in time to hear the other person pointing at Damien. He said, "Aren't you just a freeloader? Relying on your looks to earn a living? Felicity will dump you sooner or later." Hearing him say that, Damien was not only not angry but actually laughed. He said, looking at him, he indeed could not be a freeloader. He had a wife to support him, so what business was it of his? If Damien had a tail, it would surely be wagging up to the sky. The other person was choked into silence, turning his head to look at me. Seeing that Damien was not provoked, he immediately started to sow discord, starting with me. He told me, Felicity, that I should investigate him carefully. Everyone knew the Tan family was now top tier, even about to surpass the Shen family. He told me not to be a bloodbag for others, raising an ungrateful wretch without knowing it. Damien stood in the shadows, hands in his pockets, his eyes dark and unfathomable. I walked over, linked my arm with his, and retorted to the other person without standing on ceremony. I said I supported my husband and I was happy about it, asking if he could control that. For the first time, Damien failed to manage his expression, unable to suppress the smile at the corner of his mouth. I pulled him away, and he followed behind me incredibly obediently. Getting into the car, he seemed to still be savoring what I had just said. I frowned, looking at him with a serious expression, pointing out that someone pointed right at his face and cursed him. Yet he did not know how to resist. Damien shrugged, propping his head on one hand to look at me, his words even carrying a hint of acting spoiled, asking what could be done. He said the man was right. He admitted he was indeed a freeloader. When we got married, he had transferred all his shares to me. He truly was no different from a freeloader now. I was momentarily speechless. Upon returning home, I decided to settle the score with him. I rolled up my sleeves, casually threw my handbag onto the sofa, and poured a glass of ice water to soothe my throat. Damien's eyes followed my every movement vaguely. I propped one hand on the table and began to question him. I asked Damien if he didn't intend to explain to me when exactly I forced him. He lied without changing his expression, saying it was before I lost my memory. Crap, I forgot I was still pretending to have amnesia. I pursued my lips, thinking frantically, and finally fabricated a lie. I told him to stop deceiving me as I had lost my memory. Not my mind, I said I had already asked Chloe. She said he was very free and I basically never controlled him. The light overhead shone down on Damien, creating a shadowed area. I didn't know which nerve of his this sentence had provoked. He raised his eyebrows, his words coming out with a hint of stubbornness. He asked why I didn't control anything. I didn't react in time. Damien didn't miss any expression on my face. Looking at my uncomprehending appearance, he finally sighed, seeming a bit regretful. He said it was nothing. He didn't say any more, and we stood in silent confrontation. Finally, I surrendered and walked towards him. As I passed Damien, he seemed to think I was going to rest. So he leaned sideways to make way. I stopped a fist's distance away from him, reached out to grab his collar, forcing him to lower his head and look straight at me. Because of my sudden action, a brief look of surprise flashed in his eyes, which was immediately replaced by undeniable joy and an excitement bordering on morbid. I told Damien I felt I was at a disadvantage. Everyone assumed I was forcing him, but I had done nothing, and that was unfair. He asked so what? When he looked at me, intense emotion swirled in his dark pupils, the ending note of his voice high as if seducing me. I reached out to stroke his face. The cold sensation from my palm made his whole body tremble. His Adam's apple bobbed, seeming to have endured to the limit, using his eyes to urge me on. Doing this for the first time. My heart beat wildly out of control. I silently cheered myself on, and finally summoned the courage to move forward and kissed his lips clumsily. Damien seemed to have finally received permission. His hand glided over my waist, finally turning the tables to take the lead. Although my head was spinning to the point of being slightly lightheaded, I still refused to admit defeat and spoke harsh words. I said this was what was called forcing. Damien licked his lips, appearing slightly disappointed, and a laugh escaped his throat, sounding like flirtation. The temperature on my cheeks continued to rise, and I finally cursed a profanity silently in my heart. It was incomparable, this Damien seemed to be a true pervert. Unlike the fake type like me. I almost ran away in a panic. 2 years, and had the channel finally switched to adult content. Heaven knew when I first heard the news that I forced Damien to marry me. I thought I was about to enjoy a delicious meal, but who knew this car would drive straight into a kindergarten? Hearing me tell the story of tonight, Chloe immediately sent a string of messages. The provocative words were exactly like reading some web novel. Because of these words, my thoughts also gradually drifted. Finally, indescribable images appeared in my mind. I hurriedly pulled the topic back, telling her about the abnormalities I felt in Damien. Chloe became even more excited, saying that pretending to force love but accidentally forcing a sickly possessive male spirit was a setting so delicious she devoured it. With someone like her, there was nothing to say. After that night, I wanted to pretend nothing had happened, but Damien didn't want to. He kept hovering in front of me, even sometimes using words to imply that I should remember that day. Ironically, every time I was teased by him until my cheeks burned hot. I was so angry that I had to find over 10 possessive romance novels to memorize every word. I didn't believe that my hard work afterward couldn't match his natural talent. I studied for a few days and was planning to make a move, but Damien didn't give me the chance. He went on a business trip. Although he was a freeloader, he still had to go to work. Damien reported matters big and small to me. I occasionally answered him with a few sentences, and he didn't get angry. I felt something was not right. It wasn't right. Not like the style of this male ghost. While racking my brain, a matter suddenly popped into my head. In the first month of our marriage, one night, Damien returned home drunk at 2 a.m. I was very angry and had a huge argument with him. In the end, he loosened his tie while provoking me. He told me, Felicity, that if I wanted him within my sight at all times, I should go ahead and install cameras in the house. I had never been able to withstand provocation. The next day I really installed cameras in every corner of the house. Not long after installing them, I regretted it. Because the start of my marriage with Damien wasn't very good. I tried my best hoping that after marriage we could live together in a healthier way. So I never actually turned on the cameras to look. Thinking of this, my scalp went numb unconsciously. It turned out Damien had done it on purpose from beginning to end. I opened the camera software, which showed that a guest had viewed tens of thousands of times in the past 2 years, the most recent being 1 minute ago. I stood stunned on the spot. The camera in the top left corner seemed to be staring right at me. I cursed silently in my heart. It was truly a waste of talent for Damien not to compete for an Oscar. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, and finally, I came up with a plan. From Chloe's collection of short videos, I selected a few male streamers who were best at flirting. I deliberately aimed the phone at the camera and turned the volume up to the maximum. The first video hadn't even finished playing when Damien's video call popped up. I pretended not to see and continued watching with interest. The other side called over 10 times in a row, and I finally pressed answer. Damien asked what I was doing. Even through the phone, I could feel Damien gritting his teeth, sounding like he was about to go crazy. I lied with my eyes open, saying I had just fallen asleep. Damien was made to laugh by my anger. He asked if I slept while watching male streamers flirt, asking if I liked it that much. I feigned surprise, looking around, and finally stopped my gaze at the camera. I asked if he was monitoring me. Wrong. Damien's laughter rang close to my ear. He said this was the thing I used to monitor him. I couldn't help but roll my eyes secretly. Did he really take me for a fool? Based on my understanding of myself, I surely had never watched it. The person on the other end fell silent. He was clearly smiling, but it was a bit gloomy. He admitted it was true, then asked why I didn't watch. It was that same question again. My grip on the phone tightened. Raising my head as if confronting Damien. Damien stopped reporting his work to me, seemingly wanting to use this method to show his unhappiness. That day's conversation ended on a slightly unhappy note. He asked me several times why and I didn't know how to answer. Finally he hung up. That night, he shared several earworm songs on his social media moments late at night. Some curious person commented below asking if the main wife's position had finally been provoked and if Felicity had kicked him out. If it were before, Damien would definitely have replied to each person. But today he surprisingly chose silence. I pressed like on his moment. Acting until now, it was time to pull in the net. That night I attended a party full of childhood friends. I asked Chloe to take a photo for me. She handed the phone to me and joked. She said Julian Pay and I looked quite like a couple. She remembered that she used to truly ship this pair back in the day. Julian was one of my childhood friends. That photo was taken with a distance of over 10 centimeters between Julian and me. But it looked as if we were sitting right next to each other. I hadn't said anything yet. Julian hurriedly spoke up to explain. He asked what the joke was, telling her not to talk nonsense as I had been married for 2 years. He said if that guy found out, he would be dead meat. I smirked and handed the phone back to Chloe. I asked her to do me a favor and post this photo on Moments, set visible only to Damien. Julian almost coughed up blood. He asked why I was harming him when he hadn't provoked me. I glanced at him and offered him a new model sports car. He shut his mouth. Chloe was a bit unconvinced, and just as she was about to speak, I told her that I predicted the jewelry she liked would be sent to her house tomorrow. Chloe quickly posted the moment. I nodded with satisfaction, waited for a few hours, and then specifically named Julian to take me home. He took me to the door, and I invited him inside to sit. Julian refused. He said forget it, he didn't know if he would be able to walk out. I smiled helplessly. The lights were not on in the room, but I knew Damien was back. The faint moonlight shone into the living room. I vaguely made out a figure sitting on the sofa. I turned on the light, the sudden brightness made Damien unaccustomed to it. He narrowed his eyes, then lifted his head to look at me. And I finally saw his face clearly. Along with the handcuffs and shackles placed on the coffee table. I pretended nothing was wrong, walked over, and saw his phone with the shattered screen and his hand still oozing blood. I asked why it was bleeding. I took the first aid kit to treat his wound. He was unusually obedient. In the large house, momentarily only the sound of each other's breathing and heartbeats could be heard. After I finished bandaging him, I casually asked why the phone had fallen and broken. Damien stared at me, intense emotions swirling in his eyes. He didn't answer my question directly but suddenly stated that I hadn't lost my memory. My heart skipped a beat. Pretending to be calm, I admitted it without hesitation. True. He gave a scoff, picking up the handcuffs to play with. He said Chloe's moment was something I told her to show him. My back had started to sweat. I tried to look him in the eye. Correct. The veins on Damien's neck bulged, and he spoke the last sentence with some difficulty. He said I intentionally let that guy take me home, his palms already soaked in sweat. I admitted it. Damien looked at me for a few seconds then laughed softly. He laughed until his chest shook, laughed until the corners of his eyes began to turn red. He asked if Felicity was very smug. I frowned. I asked what I was smug about. The smile on his face quickly vanished, accusing me word by word. Smug because clearly he had loved me long ago but still stubbornly refused to admit it. Smug because for 2 years his anger wasn't because I forced him to marry, but because after marriage I did nothing. Smug because when he heard I was in a car accident, he thought if I died, he wouldn't live either. That he wouldn't let me go even as a ghost. His eyes were red, tears about to fall. Holding the handcuffs, he walked step by step towards me. I looked at him without backing down. Damien. I gave him one last chance to organize his words. He froze not far from me, tears rolling down his cheeks. He struggled and hesitated for a few seconds. finally raising his hand to cuff his own wrist with one side, then offering the other side to me. His voice trembled as he begged me. "Felicity, don't abandon me." After that unhappy conversation that day, I thought for a long time and finally understood why on that night 1 month after the wedding Damien lost control. He must have seen Julian and me having dinner together. I found Julian to confirm. He lamented to me not to mention it, saying the next day he suddenly received a warning from Damien. He said if it weren't out of respect for me, he really suspected Damien would have beaten him to death. Connecting all the stories, I finally found the cause of the plot development over the past 2 years. Because I felt guilty towards Damien for forcing him to marry me, assuming he didn't like me. I tried my best to keep a distance from him. But Damien interpreted my actions as a sign of not liking him. I couldn't lower myself to coax him. He didn't dare admit he liked me. So the misunderstanding piled up, and the road became increasingly winding. The provocation method worked on me, and naturally, it worked on Damien too. So I intentionally let him see that photo, intentionally let him see Julian taking me home. Facts proved the effect was very good, so good that now he offered everything, including himself, before me. Traces of tears remained on Damien's face, the light in his eyes flickering. My heart ached. Without a word, I stepped forward to embrace his waist. Damien's body trembled slightly, burying his head in the crook of my neck. He asked if I had nothing else to ask him. Damien said nothing, only hugging me tighter. Finally using all his strength to shake his head. I left his embrace, looking at him with an incredibly serious expression, saying but I had something to say to him. Damien was a bit nervous, holding my hand to seek a sense of security. I looked into his eyes word for word, incredibly serious, and said I like you. This sentence I should have said from the moment I confessed and forced him to marry me. Extreme joy erupted in Damien's eyes, he kissed my cheek repeatedly. His mouth ceaselessly saying he loved me, and then he couldn't control it anymore. He used both hands to hold my wrists tight, constantly demanding I repeat his words. Say I saw his beauty and became greedy, say I saw his beauty and became greedy. Say I seized him by force, say I seized him by force. Say I love him, say I love him. He lowered his head to kiss the corner of my eye, finally hugging me tightly into his arms and falling asleep. The sun still rose as usual, we finally loved each other. True love demands vulnerability, not the pride to hide behind silence and assumptions. Often, what looks like cold indifference is actually a desperate fear of being unloved. Don't waste years playing games. Speak your heart. Because the one you think is trying to escape might actually be praying you never let go.